I'm Deborah O'Sullivan. I'm Managing Director here at 10 to 2. And very warm welcome to you all tonight. Thanks for joining us. It's a grim evening out there, so I hope you're somewhere warm and cozy. Tonight we're talking about how to interview well. It's a whistle-stop tour, so I hope you'll get as much as you need out of it. Um, we are joined by my lovely colleague, Jo Gregory, who's a fellow director at 10 to 2. Welcome, Jo.
Thanks, Deb. Hi.
Hi. Um, and for anyone who doesn't know who 10 to 2 are, we're a flexible recruitment agency. We specialize in part-time and flexible recruitment, all about work-life balance. And one of the things we thoroughly enjoy doing is sharing our knowledge and expertise, which we've gained over 18 years with our candidate base. So you're all very welcome. A little bit of housekeeping. You don't have to write everything down. We're recording this and we'll send out the recording tomorrow. And we'll also send out any questions with answers that we don't get round to answering tonight. If you have any questions, there's a queue. There should be a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Pop questions in there and I'll keep an eye on that and interrupt Jo as necessary. And you'll see, I think you'll see, we've got captions running. We don't know how to turn them off, so I hope they're not too annoying, and hopefully they might be useful for someone. Um, so we've got a lot to get through. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jo.
Thanks, Deb. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for giving us your precious time this evening. As Deb said, this is a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, so hopefully you'll take something away from it. But we are always available for your questions, queries, conversations. If you do have any further queries, we have lots of other resources available on the website. So please do take some time to have a dig around on there. And hopefully you will find some useful stuff. So, what are we going to talk about tonight? Oh, sorry, it's not working. There it is.
Great.
Tech. I don't know about you guys, but I don't enjoy interviews. Being interviewed, I don't think there's many people who really enjoy being interviewed. We totally get it. We know that it's not a fun part of the process, but it is part of the process, and the chances are it will always be part of the process. So we're trying to give some sort of before the event advice and guidance, because the very best guidance that we can give you is that the more prepared you are, the better you're going to perform. And if you only take that away from tonight, then that really is the best advice that we can give. Preparation, preparation, preparation. So tonight we're going to go through why an interview, just to put some background and context behind it, the basics and the content of an interview, the types of interview and questions that you might come up against, competency-based questions, because that is a phrase that is bandied around and nobody ever seems to know what it means. On the day basics, on the day questions, summary, and then over to you for questions. Now, there's a lot of you here, so I'm not expecting that we'll get round to answering all your questions. So as Deb said, we will come out with a Q&A. Sometimes the questions are very specific to your personal circumstance as well. If that's the case, then please do get in touch with one of us individually and we'll try and help, or we'll point you in the right direction to another piece of content that we've got or another service that we're able to provide. So, why an interview? Why do they put us through this? It's horrible. It is still the main method of recruiting. So, once you've perfected your CV, and anyone who was around for last month's CV Q&A, I know that webinar, I know you've all got perfect CVs now because you worked very hard at those. So, once you've done your CV, the interview is still the main method of recruiting. Part of the purpose of the interview is to make sure that beautiful CV that you've put together actually reflects who you are. So making sure that the paperwork that you've put forward is a true representation of you. It's a deep dive into your skill set and your approach. So it's questioning things that you've said that you can do, questioning experiences that you've said that you've had, and also seeing if there is a fit approach-wise to the way that you work, the values that you bring, the competencies that you bring. There we go. A test for fit on both sides. The both sides part of that is really, really important. And again, if there's something that I would love you to take away from this, is that the interview process is as much for you as it is for the employer. So although we're talking to you tonight about how to perfect your skills and sell yourself, remembering that this is a chance for you to assess the employer as well. Just because you've gone to the interview, just because you've gone to 3 or 4 interviews with that same employer, doesn't mean that you have to say yes if you're offered the job. Of course, it would be great, but you need to make sure you're asking all the right questions and that you're getting the answers that work for you. A chance for you to evaluate the company and role. It's almost like I've done this before, Deb. I'm preempting all of these bullet points. So yeah, we will talk about the types of questions that you could ask an employer as well. And it's an opportunity to visit the workplace. So some of us work remotely. Most of us will need to go to a workplace some of the time if you're hybrid or if you're entirely office based. It's really important that you can do the commute. It's really important that you're comfortable with the atmosphere in the office. We have a colleague who has various allergies and things. You know, if you turn up to an interview and you come away itching, it's probably not the place that you want to work. So that's an extreme example, but you know, the practicalities of where the job is based are really important, and you can assess that during your interview process. How easy it is to park, can't tell you how difficult it is sometimes when you've got a job and you can't park anywhere nearby. So the basics. Preparation. You need to understand who it is you're interviewing for. And that's not just the company name, that's not just the sector they're in. There is an expectation that you will have done your research. So you can go onto the company website, you can go onto their LinkedIn page, you can read about press releases, you can investigate some of the key stakeholders within the business. There are so many ways that you can find out about the company, and going in there with a really strong idea of who it is that you're interviewing for, as well as the role that you're interviewing, is going to stand you in much, much better stead to be able to answer the questions in a way that you know they're going to want you to answer. I just have to look down at my notes every now and again, so I'm not looking away from you, audience. Researching the people.
Can I just add in there, Jo? Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to interrupt, but one thing I would say that is company values. So the thing you get from a company website is the company values, and that can be so telling as to how they're expecting you to answer questions, and
Absolutely.
indeed the type of questioning you might want to ask them.
Absolutely. And if those company values aren't explicit on the website, maybe making a guess at what their values are by the way they talk about themselves or the language that they use. You know, if they have a page dedicated to their employees' charitable activity, you know, there are signs on the website and on their communications about what their values, what their culture might be. LinkedIn is an amazing tool to research people. The chances are you know who it is you're going to meet in the interview process. So researching them as thoroughly as you can do is really useful. But researching other people, so other people who might be in the team that you're hoping to join, or other people who are senior leaders within the business. It might be that they're thought leaders in their field and you can make comment on some of the talks that they've recently done. You know, there's all sorts of things that researching the people can give you that little bit extra, you know, that little bit of additional information to talk about. I've been interviewing for many, many years now. And when I used to interview in-house, it always really impressed me when people had looked up my profile and could, you know, ask me questions about where I'd worked before, or say, you know, oh, I see you've recently moved into this role, or whatever it might be. It just shows that the candidate has gone that extra mile to really find out about who it is they're going to be meeting. Place. So we've just talked about the interview being a good opportunity to find out where it is that the role is based. Make sure you do this research in advance of going to the interview. If the interview is in a physical location, make sure you know how to get there. Make sure you know whether there's parking nearby. Make sure you know if there's a train strike that day. You know, all of the eventualities that you could think about so that you get there on time, probably a few minutes early, so you can see, whew, because like me, you'll get a bit flustered on the way to the interview. So do the research, make sure you're prepared, you know, have your map printed out in case you're on the tube and you lose connection. Whatever it is that makes you feel better about that journey, that gives you confidence that you're going to arrive there on time or touch wood, arrive there on time. Do the preparation. If your interview is online, which a number of them will be now, especially early stages, people do take advantage of technology. Make sure your tech's working in advance. Log on not just a few minutes beforehand, but maybe check the day before that everything is working okay, and log on a few minutes beforehand, just in case they've run an update in the meantime or whatever it might be. Often companies will send you a link to a different piece of tech that you're not comfortable using or you haven't used before. So give yourself some extra time to make sure that you've got whatever it is downloaded. Try and use a desktop if you possibly can, or a laptop, rather than your phone. If you are going to use your phone, try and make sure it's in some sort of holder, or it's at least leaned up against something and stable. There is nothing worse than interviewing someone who's holding their phone, moving it around, and all you can see is up their nose. So please, 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 if you're going to use your phone, make sure that it is well positioned and stable. And then number 4 on our list here is dress. It's really, really important to make sure that you are well presented, even if the dress code is relatively casual. There's nothing wrong with contacting the employer in advance to ask what their dress code is or what their expectation is, if it makes you feel more comfortable in whatever it is that you are going to wear to that interview. Simple and professional would be our advice for any interview, no matter what the dress code. Not over the top jewelry, no slogan t-shirts. I can imagine me turning up in something with something inappropriate written on, but avoid the slogan t-shirts. And think about other things as well, no overwhelming perfume or aftershave, making sure that, you're just feeling well put together for the interview. So, preparing for the content of your interview. This is the most important prep that you can possibly do. How are you going to show that you're the best candidate for the job? What is it that you can do for the company? What is it that you can do in that job that you can really, really confidently talk about in the interview? Make sure that you spend some time getting yourself in the right mindset. We've got a couple of other webinars that we run specifically on mindset, and it's a bit of a faddy word, but making sure that you're going in feeling confident is really, really important. And an easy way to do that is to just sit with your CV and go through some of the really great things that you've done in your career so far. Think about some of the great achievements that you've had. And that's a good starting point, not only because it will boost your confidence, but also that it will start to give you some of the content for the answers for questions you're going to be asked. So reviewing the job description or the job ad. It's really important that you understand in depth, as much as possible, the job that you're actually applying for. So making sure that you're reviewing that job description over and over again. If you've got questions and you're going through an agency, ask the agency the questions. If you've got questions and you're going directly to the employer, you might feel a bit more uncomfortable asking the employer, but actually they're probably going to take it as a positive that you're looking for clarification before you come in for the interview. Making sure that you ask the question framed in the right way can be a really positive thing. Review your CV, as we've just said. Make sure that you can talk very confidently about your CV. If you want, print it out and take it in with you. There is no harm in having your document there, and you can have it in front of you and point to it, as long as you're talking confidently about the experiences that you've had. Match your job description to the CV, to your CV. Again, we talked about this a lot in the CV webinar that we run, in tailoring your CV for that job ad. If you've done that really well, it should be really easy for you to point the employer to the parts of your CV that are relevant for their job and really make them see just how perfect you are for that opportunity. You need to be able to make them think that you're a walking version of their job description. You could walk into that department and fill the little shaped hole that they've got perfectly. And think of examples to support the key areas. So reviewing that job description, identifying what the key areas are that they need to achieve with that role, and making sure that you've got examples from your career so far that meet those requirements. Know your motivations and reasons. It's no longer good enough to say that you want the role because it's down the road and it's part-time, even if those are the reasons that you want the job. You need to understand why it is you want to work for that business, why you want to work in that role, what it is about that business that excites you, what it is about that position that excites you. We get a lot of candidates come to us who feel as though they are overqualified for the roles that they're applying for. And this can be something really difficult to articulate when you talk about your motivations. But if you've got a pre-prepared sentence or phrase or couple of sentences that you are really confident about, that are said with a genuine kind of commitment to, then you'll feel much more confident when they ask you about your motivations and your reasons, and they will ask. So, types of interview. Worried where we are for time. Okay, we're okay. Types of interview. Telephone or video. More commonly, video is being used for first stage interviews. So, especially post pandemic, everybody does everything on Zoom or Teams. And the chances are most employers are going to do a kind of first conversation using some sort of video tool. These are normally relatively informal, they're normally relatively short. Even so, we would always say be as prepared as possible. I always advise candidates to prepare for a full-on interview, even if they're only having a 20-minute conversation. And the reason is you don't know what they're going to ask you. We don't know what they're going to ask you. It might be that they just have a lovely chat and they ask you how your day's been and they have a very gentle, informal conversation. But better to be over prepared than for them to suddenly throw a competency-based question at you, or to suddenly say, so what do you know about my company? And for you not to have the answers. Face-to-face interviews are still the most common. We find even with roles that are predominantly remote-based, they will probably want to meet you face-to-face at some point in the interview process. It's really useful for you as well to really get to know that person. And if you've got a hybrid role, or if there's the chance that you might need to go into an office from time to time, again, going into that office and checking it out is really important. It may be the make or break as part of your decision process. Panel or assessment. Most of the time, this is larger corporates. We tend to deal with SMEs, but I'm sure that you guys are all interviewing through other routes. How very dare you not stay with us exclusively. Panel and assessment interviews do still happen. If you're faced with this, the chances are you're going to have a number of people who will be asking you different things because they'll be looking at the role from different angles. So it might be somebody from HR, the line manager of the role, their line manager, and a counterpart from the same team, or maybe somebody from another stakeholder within the business. They're all going to have slightly different interpretations of the role. They're all going to have slightly different things they want to achieve from the role. So you're going to have questions fired at you from different people. Principles of the interview are still the same. The more prepared you are, the better you're going to do. So just making sure that you treat it like you would any other interview, make sure you're as prepared as humanly possible. And then the note on the bottom there, more senior positions often include presentations, tasks, or psychometrics. I'm finding that actually even what would be considered relatively junior roles are more often including additional assessments. So whether that's a presentation or a task, or sometimes psychometrics. Psychometrics are becoming more of a popular tool. We at Tend to think that they're a really, really useful additional tool to recruitment processes. And they're not get it right or get it wrong. They are more to assess core strengths, core competencies, approaches, communication styles, these sorts of things that can be very, very important for team fit. Businesses don't typically use them as an exclusion tool. They normally use them as something to support their interview process and to add to the depth of the questioning that they're able to go into. Normally they're used at later stages in the process, but sometimes they can be introduced quite early, depending on who the employer is and what it is that they want to use the use the information for. But don't be scared of them. Please don't be scared of them. And you can't trick them. So you just need to follow the instructions, keep a cool head. I've tried tricking them before, it doesn't. Types of questions. Okay. So one of the reasons that they go through your career history, other than to check it off and to see that you're telling the truth on your CV and to understand what your experience is that past behaviour is the best indicator of future performance. So if they can talk to you about experiences that you've had in the past, it will give them an idea of how you deal with situations, how you use your skills in a practical application, and the types of behaviours that you demonstrate. So as we've just said, they go through your work history to establish basic facts against your CV. So it might be, can you briefly talk me through your CV? Again, this is why it's really important that you know your CV, because if you fumble through where you've been or what you've done or what your dates were, then it can just be quite uncomfortable. Competency based on the skills that you need to perform the job. So there are going to be certain skills that are going to be very important for different types of jobs. And those will be the competencies that they're hoping that you're going to be able to apply. So some of the questions that they're going to ask are going to be not about specific experiences or specific tasks that you've done, but more about your general skill set. So it might be, tell me about a time when you've supported a colleague who has struggled with an area of work. If you're applying for a role that is in a team where you're going to be working very collaboratively, they're going to be interested in your ability to support other colleagues. Or another example could be, give me an example of an experience that reflects your commitment to customer focus. Again, coming back to Deborah's point about values, if a business really is very, very customer centric and they want to make sure that everyone in their organization has customer focus, then this is a common question that they might ask to ascertain what your understanding of commitment to customer focus means and whether you've applied that in the past. Behavioral. So this is where they'll dig into your way of thinking. So give me an example of a time when you didn't meet a goal and how you handled this. If your example is, I cried in the corner for a day, that's what I'd say. Then it might be that they think, oh dear, she doesn't handle failure very well, does she? Or whatever it might be. So again, thinking about examples of not just achievements, but maybe examples of things that haven't quite gone your way. The key is here, how you've turned it around, or make sure that there's a positive ending. You are in a Hollywood movie. Everybody wants to leave the theatre smiling. Nobody wants to leave crying. Tell me about a time when you've had to persuade someone resistant to your direction in performing a task. Again, try and think of an example that has a positive outcome and doesn't have you slamming your fists on the desk. And values. It's becoming more and more important to individuals and to businesses that values align. It can't always be the case. We're not always going to have 100% match, but it's important in general that your values and the company's values align, that you're not in kind of direct opposition to what they stand for or what they want to stand for. So a question that you might be posed with is, describe a situation where you have demonstrated integrity, if integrity is indeed one of their values. So having a think about, based on the values that you're able to ascertain the company has, what questions they might ask you and how you're able to demonstrate those values. Obviously, if you see those values and they sit in contradiction with your own, then rethink going to the interview. But remember as well that the wording of values needs some consideration as well. So different people assign different words to their values. So try not to just take it as verbatim that you have to assign that word. Think about what that word means and other words that you might have in your vocabulary that are similar. And tell us about a time when you have worked for an organisation that has matched your values. So this is a really nice opportunity for you to talk about your wider values and bring your values to the table. And of course, if they happen to replicate those that they've advertised on their website, then you're quits in. Overall, don't be worried about the categories of questions. If you can just take these kinds of areas and make sure that you've got some standardised answers, then fingers crossed you should be fine. Many of you will have heard of the STAR approach to answering questions. This is predominantly applied, I can't talk tonight, to competency-based and behavioural-based questions. The STAR is a really simple way of breaking down your response and keeping it quite concise, which is important if you like to rabbit away. No names. So using the STAR method to structure your answer is really quite simple if you break it down, and you can just have a sentence or two against each of the areas. So first of all, you think about the situation. So whatever question they ask you, think about a situation that relates to that question that you have found yourself in. It's really important that you were a key player in this situation, because you're going to want to dig down into the detail. So if you're giving a situation where you were on the side and you don't really know the detail, you might need to think about a different situation, because you really need to be able to understand your role in the situation. So the situation will lead to a task. So that task will have been either dictated to you, or it will be a task to resolve the situation. And then the real key thing here is your action. So the action that you took in that situation or to resolve that task. This is where you need to be able to add some detail. This is where you need to be able to talk about what you did, or if it was part of a team, what your team members did, and how your action then led to a result. The result may be positive or negative. It's not that it almost doesn't matter, but you need to be able to demonstrate the learning if it was a negative result. If it was a positive result, you need to be able to demonstrate your contribution to that positive result. So it all wraps up in a nice little story, hopefully directly addressing their question. And it allows you to be really clear and concise. It means that you don't get lost on a tangent. It means that you're able to answer their question in a really positive and concise manner. So you're on the day, you're trying to rack through your brains, you're trying to think, right, what did Joe tell me to do? Here is your checklist. Right, test your check. Make sure the link is working. Make sure you don't have washing hanging up in the background. These things in my background are really clever. They hide a multitude of sins. There's all sorts of stuff going on back here that you can't see. Turn off your phone. Make sure you haven't got any interruptions. If you're on your laptop, you might want to turn off things like your Teams notification or any messages that you might have popping up that could distract you while you're in the interview. Arrive on time or with time to spare. That's both for online and in-person meetings. Remember your body language. We have the best webinar on body language. If you go onto our website, I can't remember what it's called, as presenting yourself for presentation skills, you have to watch it. Not only is it brilliant and full of amazing content, but it's so funny. Mention distractions. If you have an unavoidable distraction that might happen, so if you have a child at home with you, or if you have a particularly loud dog, feel free to mention that in the first instance, and maybe start with I'm terribly sorry, however, this is the circumstance, this might happen. It will make you feel better knowing that that's out there. And then if something does happen to distract, you've already kind of pre-warned, so it's not going to be the sudden panic that it might be otherwise. Appear interested. Again, body language, smiling, upright, engaged. It is amazing how many times we get feedback from clients that they just didn't feel as though the candidate was interested in the role. So you really need to appear interested. And when you're on a video call, you might need to be overly animated to appear interested, because sometimes the other cues that your body language in person might give can't be seen on a video call. Make sure you're listening. So if for some reason you didn't quite hear the question, or maybe you need to buy yourself a few extra seconds, ask somebody to repeat something, but make sure you really do understand what it is that they're asking you. Or if they've told you a bit of information about the company and you need some clarification, go back and ask, make sure you've really heard what it is that the interviewer is saying or asking. Ask questions directly, as we've just said, ask for clarification. If they've said something you don't understand or used a piece of company jargon that you're not aware of, ask for clarification. Be honest. um, it's very tempting to make up a bit of experience or to embellish on something. It will only lead to you getting confused and finding yourself in an awkward situation later down the line. So do be honest and take your time. You know, take a minute. If you've got a cup of water, taking a little sip of water just buys you those few extra seconds to go before you then answer. And stay positive. This is about everything. Stay smiling, stay positive, stay engaged. Even if partway through the interview you're kind of thinking, oh, this isn't for me, still giving that professional representation of yourself is really important, because maybe there's another role that's coming up in that business that is for you, or maybe the person who's interviewing you ends up with a different business and they remember you. So really staying positive through the whole process. Always maintain professionalism. Hopefully everybody knows you don't talk negatively about past employers. You stay professional. You don't sit biting your fingernails, all of the things I'm trying to think about that might come across as unprofessional, but making sure that you're maintaining that professionalism throughout the whole process. And show them you're keen. Again, appear interested. Really make sure that they know that you're keen. And you can be explicit about it. You can end the interview by saying, thank you so much for your time. I'm really excited about this role. There's nothing wrong with being an eager beaver in an interview process and just really lathering it on nice and thick. Shake hands and smile. Obviously, we can't do that with being remote, but a nice big smile at the end of a remote meeting or a confident handshake of a face-to-face meeting. I get clammy hands sometimes, but even still, a confident handshake is a really professional way to end the meeting. Answering questions on the day. Running a little bit over time, so apologies. Know how to describe your strengths and characteristics. Ooh, icky interview question. Be prepared for this, though, because you're going to need to talk about your strengths and characteristics. We tend to find it very difficult to big ourselves up in this way. So again, preparation is key, because if you've got them in your mind and you're confident in them and you're able to back them up with examples, then you'll feel much more comfortable talking about your strengths and characteristics, and you won't feel like you're being arrogant or bigging yourself up, because these are strengths and characteristics that you bring to the workplace and you are proud of. Know your CV and the job description inside out. Again, you want to be able to answer questions that they ask about your CV. And if there's a line on there that you kind of go, oh, did I write that? I'm not sure. So make sure that you know everything that's on your CV, and make sure as best as possible you know and understand the job description. Use your research to tailor your answers. Everybody loves a bit of flattery. The more flattery you can get into the business or into the opportunity, the better. It also shows that you've done your research and that you really understand your connection to that role and your connection to that business. Know your agenda. Again, this comes back to your motivations and your reasons. So, understand why you want that job. Understand why you want to work for that business, so that when they ask you those questions, you're giving genuine answers. Trickier questions. Okay, career gaps. Lots and lots and lots of people come to 10 to 2 who have taken career gaps to look after family or loved ones or various other reasons. And they come almost apologetic. Oh, I've had a career gap and I've not really been in the workplace. Try not to do that. Try and look at your career gap as a real positive thing. The chances are during that time, you have probably learned skills, had experiences, found yourself in situations that could be turned into really great interview answers. If you genuinely can't, then make sure that the employer understands the reasons that you've had that career gap. Make sure they're not left with any question marks. So, hold your head up high. I took a career gap to raise my 2 kids. They're now both at school and I'm ready to get back into the workplace. I really want to reignite my career. Have a short, to the point, confident answer for what your career gap was about and why you had it. And importantly, why you now feel as though it's your time to get back into the workplace. I think that that's something that people forget is you are trying to get back into the workplace. You've done the thinking, you're ready for this. Answer if you're asked about your salary. This is a difficult one. And there's a lot of people who come to us not really sure how to answer this question. Now, there's a number of ways around it. First and best, we find, and we talk to clients about this as well, is if there is a very clear salary expectation right from the beginning, because then hopefully you can align your answer with the bracket that's available for the role. However, if that's not the case, our general suggestion is to be confident with the amount that you are pitching yourself at. So first of all, make sure that you've done the behind the scenes work. Make sure that whatever amount that you're asking for is actually something that you can make work, because there's nothing worse than getting to the end of the process and then realizing that actually you need £5,000 more just to cover your childcare costs. So make sure you've done the sums first of all. It's not always based on your last salary. You know, we have a lot of people who've come to us who've had huge city jobs in the past, and they don't want to do that anymore. So if you're not basing it on your last salary, make sure that you've done some market research about what that role is generally worth and measure that up against what it is that you need to earn so that you're being realistic about your expectations. If you're able to ascertain a bracket before you get to the point where you're asked about these questions, then that's the very best way around it, so that there's no uncomfortable questions being asked in the interview at all. Okay. Obviously, we are flexibility experts, so most of the roles that we represent are going to have an element of flexibility. Again, our objective is to try and make sure this flexibility is understood right from the get-go. That's not always the case. So if you are asked about what flexibility you require, again, make sure that you've done the thinking. Not to be so rigid that you can't have a conversation about what's going to work best for the role. But if you know for definite there is absolutely no way you can get childcare for little Johnny on a Thursday, for example, don't sit there and go, oh yeah, I'm fine to work Thursdays. You know, make sure that you've done the thinking behind the scenes so that when you have that conversation, you're confident in having that conversation. The childcare. As much as possible, try and make sure that you've got a rough plan in place for what your childcare arrangements are going to look like. The too senior question. Again, we've just alluded to this. We have a lot of candidates coming through 10 to 2 who aren't making career choices based on what traditionally a linear career should look like. It might be that you've operated at a finance director level and decided that at this point in your life, you'd rather be a management accountant or an FC. And a lot of employers are going to say, oh, but you're too senior for this role. Will you get bored? You know, will you move on? There's lots of assumptions that can be made. Again, the very best thing to do is to have a genuine and prepared stock answer to this. It might be that you say, at this point in my life, I'm not looking for a role that requires me to have people management responsibilities, for example, as long as, of course, the role you're applying for doesn't have people management responsibilities. Whatever your reason is, make sure that you put a positive spin on it. Make sure that you can talk about it genuinely, and that it gives the impression that you've done the thinking about the implications that it might have. Because it is a genuine concern of employers, whether we feel it should be or not. It is a genuine concern of employers, and you need to be understanding of that and have a conversation, rather than just point blank say, I'm just interested in the role, I just want the role. You know, it's much more meaningful for them if you can demonstrate that you've done the thinking around it. And asking great questions. The other great thing about learning as much as you can about the role and about the employer is that it gives you a lot of collateral to then ask them questions. And you asking them great questions actually makes you look so much better, because it shows a genuine interest in the company, a genuine interest in the role and how it works with the business, a genuine interest in their sector or their industry. So the more research that you can do, the better, because you are going to have more questions to ask. if you can ask questions about their positioning in the industry or competitors of theirs, that shows an even deeper level of research that you've gone into rather than just reading what's on their website. So, in summary, excuse me for one second. Preparation is key. In case we hadn't mentioned that word enough, prepare, prepare, prepare. Um, Spend time on your CV, job description, and don't forget the basics that we've talked about. Tailor your answers. We talked about tailoring your CV. We're now talking about tailoring your answers, but it is so important, especially in the market at the moment, that employers can see that you've really taken the time to prepare for that interview specifically. Relax and enjoy yourself as much as possible. They are recruiting you as a person. They do want to get to know you as a person and not Robot Joe, who goes in and answers questions very robotically. And as we just said a minute ago, ask great questions. So make sure, as well as preparing your answers, you're also preparing your questions. Have you guys got any questions?
Well done, Joe. It's a very, very fast run through everything you need to think through, but that was excellent. Thank you. We've got some questions. We've only got a few minutes left, but let's see if we can get through a couple. I've got one that says, the bit I feel stuck on in an interview is talk me through your CV. I know my CV, I just feel like a waffle, and that's feedback I've had. Any guidance on this? How long should I be talking? How far back should I go?
Great question, first of all. How far back you should go depends on what job it is that you're applying for. It might be that your experience that's relevant to that role was quite early on in your career. It might be that your experience for that role was just your last job. So make sure that the way that you're going through your CV is relevant for the role that you're applying for. You can waffle a little bit or talk a little bit more about roles that you've had that are really relevant to that, and then maybe shorten the answers or shorten the explanation that you give of less relevant roles. You don't have to go right the way back to I waitressed in Pizza Hut when I was 16, unless that's relevant. So without sounding like a non-answer, you need to prepare your answer to that question as you would prepare your answers to any other questions, and make sure that it is relevant to the role that you're applying for.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. You want to keep you. I think you also want to keep the interviewer's interest. If you can see their eyes glazing over, cut it short. They don't want a whole history. So then I've got another one around. Oh, sorry, I just lost my notes. When in an interview application process should you make a flexible working request or even discuss this?
Okay, this is another great question, and one that we're posed with a lot. Lots of the time, the flexibility that's available against a role will be mentioned in the advertising process. But we understand at 10 to 2 that a lot of people looking for flexibility will still be applying for full-time roles and then bringing flexibility into the conversation. I don't think there is a right or wrong answer to this necessarily. However, having sat as an employer in the past, I would say that the earlier on in the process you're able to start the discussion around flexibility, the better for everybody. You can normally gain some insight from a company's values, from their existing employees, from the way they talk about flexibility or those sorts of subjects in their literature or in their communications, as to whether it's something that they're going to be open to or not. So I would use that as your clue. If it's something that they talk very openly about, talk about it right from the beginning, and just make sure that you're not getting to the end of the process and wasting yours and other people's time. Understandably, sometimes there aren't those clues available, and you might want to demonstrate that you are the perfect candidate for the role before asking the question. You can do that, but you do run the risk of wasting yours and everybody else's time. So I think mine and generally 10 to 2's approach would be to try and have those conversations as early as possible in the process. Obviously, if you're going through an agency, you've got that go between. If you do need to go direct to the company, it can be more awkward. But to be honest, if they're a company who don't want to even investigate flexibility, are they a company that you really want to work for in the first place?
Yeah, very good point. Um, I've got loads of questions here, Joe. So we're out of time. So what I will say to everyone, thank you so much for participating and giving us your questions. We will answer them all in a Q&A document, and we'll send that out tomorrow. So apologies if we haven't got round to your question. Um, Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you felt that was useful input. If you feel you need any more support, then we do have some other services, some one-to-one interview coaching. So if you feel you need something more tailored, then we can help. Check it out on the website. We'll put a link in the FAQs we send out tomorrow. So yes, thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody. And we hope to see you on another 10 to 2 webinar really soon. Have a
Thanks,
good evening.
everyone. Enjoy your evening. Bye.
Bye.